All right. Welcome, everybody. So glad to have you here with us. And George, so glad to be here with you, my friend. Looking forward to a fun session today. As always, welcome.
Thank you so much, as always, Ben. It's always great to be with you on these live. There's nothing more exciting, man. I love jumping on here. It's a little bit better in person when I'm right beside you. I feel a little bit contained. The principal's right there to kind of pull me in, but you trusted me to be afar. So I'm coming from Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm excited about everybody. I said it before we went live, man. The chat is already going, and I'm excited. That's my favorite part, is connecting with everybody else, seeing where everybody's from. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. Ben's chiming in from Northern Alabama, and we're excited about today's session.
All right. So for all of you out there, if you didn't get that cue from George, chime in, let us know where you're connecting in from. We are so glad you're here with us, and we've got a great and packed session for you today. We've got a few minutes here at the beginning to get some housekeeping things checked off out of the way, and then we're going to dive into a lot of good conversations, some great insights, and then George and I are going to share the findings, at least an abbreviated portion of that, of some of the research we've just finished around what's happening in the hiring landscape right now. Who's hiring? What's going on there? Ghosting, pay transparency, equity and fairness, all those kinds of things. It's going to be a great session. So stay tuned for good stuff, and we'll dive into this. Okay. So let's see. Get some fun notifications from StreamYard here. All right. So today, here's what we're going to do. We are going to be giving away some great stuff to all of you that are chiming in, that are listening, that are communicating with us during the session. So let us know what you're learning. Let us know what's interesting for you. If you've got a story to share, please do so in the chat. Feel free to play a part in that. We want you to be an active participant, not just a spectator. We bribe you for that. So we have some great giveaways, have some copies of my new book that I'll be signing and sharing out. We also have some goodies, courtesy of Goody. Didn't mean to do that. The team over at Goody has donated some things for us as well. So I'll give them a shout out in a minute, let you know how you can get a free gift there, but also they'll be giving some things away as we go through the session. So stay tuned as well for that. We just got our confirmation a few minutes ago from HRCI. Credits are approved. SHRM credits already were approved. So those details will be going out after the event. You have to attend to get those. You have to be registered to get those. And last but not least, occasionally George gets so awesome that he breaks LinkedIn. It's like hangs up, freezes up. It may reload your session. It's okay. You'll just come right back in. It'll pick you up right where you need to be. If it continues giving you hiccups and stuff, you can jump over to the Facebook stream on HR Summer School, or you can jump over to the YouTube stream under Ben Eubanks, and you can find those pretty easily with a quick search and just continue there on. You should have got an email with those details, but if you didn't, you can find this pretty quickly, pretty easily. All right. Speaking of Goody, thanks to them, we have some great sponsors that have come alongside us to partner and make sure that the event is going to happen today and go off amazingly and give some great stuff for all of you. Goody has done some good stuff for us with our summer school events in the past and continuing to support the event series we're putting together. So if you are working through trying to figure out how do we connect with people, how do we make sure that our new hires are excited, how do we make sure that they don't say yes and then don't show up on day one. What can we do to build that relationship? One of the things that we're seeing more companies do is use tools like Goody to help reach out, connect, send something kind of fun, some swag, something like that. So you can try that out completely for free, send a gift to someone, and explore that a little bit. On goody.com/business is the way you do that. And again, as I mentioned, they'll be sharing some giveaways with us during the event today. So at the very end, stay tuned till then, see if your name gets called out to win some prizes, because there's some good stuff coming that way. Now, here's what you can expect for the next hour and a half, 45 minutes or so that we have together. So we're getting our housekeeping announcements checked off now. We're going to have a couple different conversations coming along here. First one's going to be with Mike Foster. We're going to talk about these different topics that are priorities for all of you. We're pulling from the research some of the key insights, and then I get a chance to discuss, debate, all those kind of things with these different leaders about what they're seeing, how they're experiencing this, to the employers they're supporting, things like that. So the things you see here as topics are probably relevant to every single one of you. And if you're like, we're pretty good there, stay tuned. We'll change topics every 15 minutes or so for that first hour and cover a lot of things. Then we're going to transition. George and I are going to be sharing research release, sharing with you what we're seeing in the data. We've surveyed 1,000 plus employers and 1,000 candidates. And so we'll share some of the things with you, the highlights there. The hardest part, I was telling George the other day, was really trying to figure out how to get 150 something different data points, slides, everything else into something short, digestible, consumable. So we've done that to the best of our ability. And there'll be lots of other things. We'll let you know if you want to see other topics we can't cover in the time today. We'll give you a list of those, and you can let us know what you want to see more of. All right. And last but not least, we'll wrap up with some good giveaways, all those good things. George, anything else before we get started here?
I don't want to take up too much time. I'm actually excited to hear some of these conversations. So, without further ado, Ben, I think we should get started and let's learn about these trends that we're seeing and how they can apply into the workplace and really adapt to what we're seeing in 2023.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. So first up, we're going to hear from Mike Foster over at Advanced RPO. We're going to dive into some fun things. Again, be ready to take some notes. Let us know in the chat what things you think are interesting, what you're learning from. I'll make sure and tag Mike and Advanced over there in the chat as well so that you all can connect with them if you want to, because you're going to enjoy this conversation. Hang tight. Here it comes.
And I'm so happy that you're here with us and hope you enjoyed hearing some of the neat insights and ideas already in the session. We're going to get to some more. Don't you worry about that. I'm so excited with this next conversation because I'm going to dive in with Mike Foster and talking about some of the things that they are seeing over at Advanced RPO within the hiring space. They support lots of employers that are trying to figure out how to navigate what's going on. They're supporting them with their hiring activities. So they are on the front lines of all these things. And Mike, I'm so glad to be with you here.
Yeah, no, and it's an honor, and I appreciate the invite, and hopefully we have a nice, productive conversation. So very excited to join you here.
Absolutely. Well, we'll let the audience give you a ranking after we're done with this and give you a thumbs up, thumbs down.
All right,
it's going to be a good
that.
one. It's going to be a great one. Absolutely. So before we get into some of the fun things that I want to cover, like ghosting and some of the other hiring for remote workers, take just a minute and tell the audience a little more about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So again, my name's Mike Foster. I'm an account director with Advanced RPO. I'm remotely based out of Charleston, South Carolina, originally from the Philadelphia area, which is why you won't hear much of a Southern drawl coming from me. But I've been in recruiting now for over 15 years, of which 12 of those have been with different RPOs in that space, of which 8 years has been managing client delivery recruitment teams. So as an account director with Advanced RPO, my position is really kind of twofold. Is one, I work directly with our clients in making sure that when we come on board that we're providing the best recruitment process, the most efficient recruitment process that's going to result in, hopefully the best candidate, hiring manager, and recruiter experience as well. Then the second part of it is being held accountable to the results of our recruitment teams in support of our clients. So I would be the direct manager of that support team that would support our clients. So a lot of client interaction and management of recruitment teams, and it's something that I've dedicated my life to, and I certainly enjoy it.
Awesome. Wonderful. Well, you and I've had a chance to have a couple conversations over the last year, and every time I walk away with a bigger perspective on things, some new ideas to think about. And even one of those from the conversation that we had a while back with some of your other colleagues, I ended up in the book because it was just that compelling to
Awesome.
me. So I'm so excited to have you here. So let's kick through a couple different ideas, concepts, things that you mentioned that you're seeing in the kind of the front lines, things that we're seeing in the data, and we'll see what the take is there. So the first thing I want to talk about is hiring for remote work. And I know that in 2020, that kind of exploded as a really big focus for employers, and since then it's kind of settled back a little bit. It's in the headlines almost every day. This company's trying to get people to come back, all that good stuff. But one of the things that popped up in the research we just finished is that 4 out of 10 employers told us that when they're hiring for a position and they mention, oh yeah, by the way, there's an in-person requirement, there's a hybrid requirement, there's something beyond just remote work, that 40% of employers see some sort of drop off or ghosting in there. I'd love to hear from you, the employers you're working with, these different positions that you have this responsibility over. Do you see remote working as like here to stay? Is it not? Is it certain industries? Like what's going on there?
Yeah, definitely. So personally, as somebody who works remote, I hope it's not going away. I do thoroughly enjoy it, but I've been doing it for a long time, even predating the COVID era as well. I think there's going to be a mix. We are definitely seeing more and more clients starting to look at bringing some people back into an office in hybrid, but we're also seeing candidate demand still asking for remote positions. So there's still very much a discrepancy between, I think, what many employers are hoping for and what the candidates' priorities are when they're looking for new employment. I think where it's going to land is somewhere in the middle. I think there's going to be a lot of challenging roles that companies are going to struggle filling, and they're going to have to look to remote roles. I truly believe for the remote roles that have really strong goals or metrics tied to them seem to perform very well from a remote perspective as well. So I think you'll see those positions really kind of start sticking around. But one of the more interesting things that I've actually heard relatively recently is across advanced RPO and all of our postings across all of our clients, in particular on LinkedIn, we're seeing right now 5 times more applicants to positions that are posted remotely than positions that are posted hybrid or on site. And in some discussions with LinkedIn, to make it even more interesting, is LinkedIn is certainly seeing that the folks who are applying to jobs remotely aren't even searching, looking, or acknowledging positions that have on-site and hybrid. So they're 2 very different candidate pools, with one of them being very much a larger candidate pool at this time. So as I said, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because I think candidates are still demanding the remote work. I still think companies that are leveraging it have a much easier time in hiring and end up hiring some of the best talent. But again, many companies really are pushing to come back on site. So
your insight on the jobs that have a strong set of metrics or KPIs, we can really prove that you're doing this job well or not based on the things you've already laid out. That's a really interesting piece to me, because when we think about, as you said a minute ago, like every company's not the same, and even every candidate's not the same, but every job isn't the same either. Some jobs would be well suited to that, and we know some jobs definitely are not ever going to be remote because you can't drive a forklift remotely or whatever else. But for people who are in other types of jobs, I'm trying to think about where that line might lie, where you can say, okay, you know what, we've got a good enough set of requirements. We know what this person's supposed to look like. We know what good looks like in this, whether they're in person or not. We can really define that well. Then you can actually have more comfort in doing that and feel like if you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, what you're paying for essentially for those positions. It's a really neat, again, I want to explore that a lot, but
I know. And I kind of reflect back to, if you go back to 2010, 2011, when remote work kind of gave its first go around of, you started seeing companies do it. And I was hybrid actually at the time, working, and the technology just wasn't there. I remember trying to connect to a Zoom meeting at the time, or whatever software it was, and it never worked, and kind of fought through it. But there was a lot of trust issues and things like that, from employers back to employees and things like that. And right around 2013 and 14, you saw a really big push of getting back into the office. Companies like Yahoo, Microsoft, and things like that were kind of, front runners in the news when it came to bringing people back into an office. And I feel like that back in office kind of culture really spent a good 5 or 6 years pre-COVID of going in that direction, and then COVID turned it upside down again. What I would definitely see as a difference between that time and now is the technology to support remote workers to do what you and I are doing right now, and doing it comfortably. It's a world of difference between then. But there still is very much that trust issue with hiring managers and their employees, and the hiring managers that put trust in the people that they're hiring and what they do, and are able to track metrics and track goals and things like that without having to over the top micromanage people, seem to be the ones that are most successful within the remote roles.
There's a great book written years ago, and forgive the title, everybody, but it's not my title. Why work sucks. And it all looks at how Best Buy had started transitioning to this thing they call the results only work environment. That's why your goals thing and your metrics thing really struck me a minute ago, because they realized at the beginning, we have to do this first. Otherwise we don't know if we're successful in this or not. And we'll never know. Yeah. And so instead of just saying, well, we're going to do it because candidates demand it, like, no, it's good for the business potentially if we know the right things, we're able to prove those things. So there's a lot of good stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff in there. And when you think of good for the business, one of the other interesting things that we're starting to see is people have been working remote for a little while now. And when you're reaching out to them for an on-site or a hybrid type of position, there seems to be a cost to come along with that. And me personally, I've even reflected, if I had to go work into an office or hybrid, what does that cost when you think of commute, when you think of some of the flexibility and things that do come along with it? What does that cost? Yeah. And we are certainly seeing that people are going, well, if you want me to come in hybrid, you got to pay me X. And there's some cost savings to go along when it comes to salary and some additional benefits, because it is a perk when done correctly. So we are certainly seeing that. And then to get back a little bit to your ghosting part of the data that you see, We do see that. What we have been advising our clients and the clients that have been seeing a really big reduction in this is the transparency of the location. Put it in the job description right there. This position is hybrid, requires 2 days a week, Wednesdays and Thursdays in the office. And this is what our expectation is of you. People who are dead set on remote work or aren't interested in that, they won't apply. And frankly, they're not wasting anybody's time. What tends to happen when we see the ghosting is clients that want to just kind of advertise to the masses, and when a recruiter gets on the phone, kind of gives them the, oh yeah, this is a hybrid position, they say no thank you. Or it starts off as a hybrid position, then or it starts off as a remote position, then all of a sudden it gets decided, well, no, we want this position to come in to the office 1 or 2 days, and then that's right around offer time, and the person backs out. And you hope that they give you a notice, but in today's world, ghosting is a very common. But you can mitigate much of that by being transparent upfront with exactly what that is, right in the job description, and making sure every touch point, the recruiter, the manager, whoever's talking to that candidate is saying the same message around what that location is.
So that's a great recommendation for everybody listening into this. Is the transparency piece popped up a couple different ways in the data this time around. So we asked a question of candidates: why are you ghosting employers? And the number one reason is, when I learned more about the job, more about the company, it wasn't for me. And this fits in that bucket, right? That could encompass a lot of things. Oh, like, wow, that manager was a jerk. The recruiter treated me like whatever, right? They weren't friendly. Like any sort of thing that you find out, or like, oh wait, this is a company that sells dumpsters or something like that. I'm not excited about that. And once they get into that, after they've just applied for the jobs blindly on Indeed or wherever else, they realize this is not for me. But this is included in that. When you're like, oh wait a minute, I thought it was going to be remote, it's not. And so for the employers out there listening in, you're thinking about, okay, how do I balance this out? Because we still need candidates, we still need people to do the work that we need. Be open about those things, as you were saying there, Mike. Be open about those things. One of the other areas we're seeing some interest from candidates is be open about the pay. I know some places have to by law, but we're seeing more interest from candidates in other places where it's not required. It may be less common to do that, but there's some interesting data that came out from some economists that were looking at that, and they said, hey, if you're advertising a job that has an advertised pay rate in it, it costs less to advertise that job. It gets a higher click-through rate. Similar to what you were saying earlier about the interest in the remote piece. So there's some things we can do. We'll say to game the system, because that sounds like a negative sort of thing, but there's some things we can do to make it more attractive and appealing to candidates. And it's not creating new things. It's not doing extra work. It's just telling them what you're already going to be doing anyway.
Yeah, no, and I 100% agree. And when you think of transparency, everyone in today's world goes right to the pay transparency conversation. And I think you hit it right on the head. The job posting sites, the advertising sites that you're working with are all ahead of where I think everyone is as far as pay transparency and things like that. So algorithms are driving all of this. The jobs that don't have any kind of pay information in it, unfortunately, you're on page 5. If you put your pay information, all magically you're on page 1 or 2. And that's if you're lucky, you'll get on page 5 sometimes when you don't have it, because what they're also doing is estimating the pay based off of what they consider some market intelligence. So I could speak for one role we were working on that didn't have any kind of pay information, was posted in California, and it got estimated on it, and unfortunately we found out was estimated like $80,000 less than what it was paying. So when we realized, why is nobody applying, looked at this job and went, well, we're paying much more than it's actually advertising. So what I have seen, the pay estimates are usually significantly lower than what most employers are actually paying. So it's hurting in the long run by allowing these systems to pay estimates and things like that. And I don't think the pay transparency is going away anytime soon. When you kind of think of the remote hybrid model, we've seen some clients that are nervous of recruiting in New York or recruiting in California, Colorado, where a lot of these pretty strict pay transparency laws are, which is what's driving them to then go, we only want people hybrid in this location. We don't want to go remote, because then we have to advertise pay in certain areas. So it's driving what I would consider probably some bad behaviors,
unintended consequences, maybe.
Correct. But it's only going to continue to grow from here. I mean, we saw that with the salary ban as it continued to grow throughout the United States. And my word of advice to employers is we've had a lot of time. This pay transparency isn't something that just popped here overnight. Even if it's not in your state where you're working out of, start preparing, start getting ready as if it's going to get rolled out in your state at any time. And one of the biggest challenges for employers, the internal equity. If you go post the position that 5 other people are working in your employer and you post it for $10,000 more a year than what they're making, you have some retention issues. So
some conversations will be had.
Yeah. So I say start working, get ahead of it, because it's a long process. It's difficult. It's not as easy as just pop some pay ranges on a job description. I think us in recruiting certainly understand that, but it just takes time. So really start looking internally at your organizations and start preparing for it, because it'll help you from a recruitment perspective for sure. And I also think it'll help from a retention issue.
Absolutely. So a quick comment to the audience out there listening right now. If you've already done some of this, you've already started putting some of those pay ranges out there. If you've got a piece of advice or recommendation for the others who either don't have to do that or haven't had to do it yet, but may have to in the future, anything you want to share in the comments here would be super helpful as they're thinking through those things. You heard some good stuff from Mike already, but just share with each other. You're good at doing those kind of things, and that would help them as they're making that own path. Again, as Mike, as you just said, not necessarily because you have to, because it's the right thing to do, because it makes your job easier in some cases from a recruiting perspective, things like that.
Yeah, and I would definitely say, if I could just quickly, that like you're not alone if you haven't gotten to the pay transparency things. And even if it's confusing and difficult, I live and breathe this space, and I'll be the first to admit that I'm learning new stuff and how to handle it every day. Even from recruitment, how do you negotiate offers when they know the salary range? Like, there's different things that we're learning and adapting as well. So don't be afraid to ask questions, to partner, to do some research and things like that, because trust me, there's plenty of people that are asking the same question that are in the same exact position as you are.
Right. I'm thinking about the parallel of we're talking about at some point getting a replacement car for my wife, and like now you can look at all the values online, everything else when you show up there at the lot, right? You know all those things before you ever even look at the car in person.
Yep.
And that has to change it for them, and yet cars still get sold, cars still get purchased. Yeah. And so the same kind of transactions can happen, and it's just there's more symmetry of information. It's kind of the technical term of that. It's not just all one person holds all the cards and they'll let you see little glimpses here and there. Now it's a different conversation, and that may be okay long term. It's going to benefit in some different ways.
Yeah, no, and it's an interesting comparison, because what you're seeing is the old days of posting a job posting. You take the exact job description that's 8 pages long and you post it up on monster.com are gone. You really got to look at, there's a job description and then there's a job advertisement. Excuse me. That job advertisement is really no different than your car example right there. Like, you're advertising everything about your company, about your process, about where it's located, about how much it pays, and as good as you can get on those advertisements and supplying as much information similar to if you're buying a car. If there's a ding in the car, you put that in the advertisement. You don't hide it, because that's what then in the end, when somebody shows up to buy the car and they see the ding, they may not buy it. So really kind of adjusting into a marketing advertising play from a job posting perspective is something that we've been working with a lot of our clients on.
Excellent. All right. So we are getting close here on our time, Mike, and I want to make sure that everybody can reach out and connect after we're done. So if they want to learn more about what you and the team at Advanced are doing, if they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah. So obviously in the comment section here, I think there's a few people probably from Advanced that are listening into this as well, so don't hesitate. But what I would say is, hopefully you can see that this is a passion of mine. If you want to just reach out on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, shoot me a message and just talk shop. I love it. And feel free to reach out to me. If you're interested in RPO services and things like that, I can certainly get you in touch with different folks around our organization, or just have a conversation to see if it even makes sense for you to explore it. But you can always check out our website, advancedrpo.com. Has lots of information and lots of different materials there for to help make that type of decision. So what I would just say is, don't be afraid to reach out, and I'm always open to connect with anybody.
Awesome. Wonderful. I'll make sure you're going to be in the comments anyway, but I'll make sure and tag you in the comments so everybody can click through. Let Mike know you heard him on the event today and connect with him on LinkedIn. I know he would appreciate that, and you'll get the benefit of this kind of expertise you're getting here from now on. So there's the benefit for everybody. So Mike, thank you so much for joining me. This has been a blast. I've enjoyed it. Time goes too fast, my friend.
I know. I can go for another hour if you want to.
Goodness. So for everybody else out there, I hope you got some good notes from this, some good ideas from it as well. And I can't wait to see you on our next session.
All right. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I enjoyed learning from Mike and hear from him talk about some of the things like transparency, but not just the pay. We talked about that piece of it. We talked about if you have remote opportunities, things like that. George, come on up, man. Join me. All right. He's got the controls now. He's got the controls now to be able to jump back into the screen instead of me controlling all the cameras. So George, one of the things I really liked about it, and someone pointed out in the chat, like, hey, we've got all these things we can be transparent about besides just pay. We shouldn't be secretive about a lot of these things if we're trying to attract people, trying to make this look like a great place to work. And what I've said for a long time is the brand that we have as an employer is basically our culture made visible to people outside our company, right? The brand we have, how people see us, how they perceive us in the marketplace is our opportunity to say, this is what it's like being here. This is what it's like working here. And I know you're a big believer in the importance of culture and values and making those visible inside the business. And I would argue that's probably even more important potentially to make it visible outside if we're trying to draw in the right kind of people. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, culture is what, your employees feel, believe, and behave most of the time, right? And so having that transparency, and we use the word brand a lot, right? That's marketing the brand, who we are, and we brand all these different aspects of sometimes what we aspire to be, and then some things that we really are. But the transparency is so key. One thing that stood out to me in that conversation, Ben, was understanding that the transparency on all levels, what it does to the employee's performance as well, right? There are so many things that kind of intertwine when we talk about all these things, culture and leadership and the connection that it has on the pay and all these things and the transparency of it. It ultimately leads to, how does George feel about his place of business, his work? How does he feel about his leadership? And what is the transparency on all those levels? When there's transparency, it connects obviously to the performance, and high performers are probably performers that feel like they belong in the place. They feel like that they can see not only what they do, but why they're doing and where they're doing it, and where it's going. So that transparency is the key, man, to all things, and how it connects. Literally, it's like a connect dot thing that I'm thinking in my head as I'm looking at this data, and you creating this little data inner guy inside of me. I think I just said data in 3 times in like 30 seconds. So I'm almost close to the bin.
Hey, you're catching up. You're almost there.
Transparency is important because it does connect to so many different things, Ben, that you and I see all the time as we're looking at this, how the transparency intertwines with the employees' behaviors. And how they are connected, how their behaviors are intertwined with their leadership, how that intertwines with their mental and the D&I aspect that it all brings together when it comes to the transparency and the opportunity gaps, right? And how those are connected as well.
Yeah, goodness, there's so much there. There's so much good stuff there. Okay, wonderful. All right. So I posted in the chat a minute ago for those of you that are watching on LinkedIn stream, at least. For some reason, the streaming tools we're using, as we always do, are not allowing us to see the comments coming on LinkedIn, to post them up and share them up on screen like we normally do, kind of laying at the bottom there. So for those of you that are new to our streams and you've never been here before, normally we have a little bit more interaction, a little bit more sharing and displaying some of the comments there. For some reason, it's not working today. So we're commenting. We're George and I are both participating on LinkedIn, engaging with all of you there, and we're keeping track of who's communicating there, just because that's where we're going to be pulling our prize winners from. But just know that normally we have a little bit more sharing, some of the comments, making those visible, and we can't quite make that happen today. Technical issues. So all that aside, we've got some great conversations coming up. So our next one here is going to be around candidate screening. So we've talked with Mike a little bit about how do we attract them, how do we appeal to them, how do we get ourselves in front of candidates in the right way. We're going to transition and talk with Chris and Carter from Modern Hire about the screening piece of this. How do we screen them in a way that candidates actually prefer, things that they care about? How do we make sure we're respecting their hopes, their wishes for what a quality screening process looks like? And some of the things in the research honestly surprised me this year. So we're going to touch on a couple of those things in this conversation. Let's go ahead and dive in.
So glad that you're here with us, and I hope you've been taking some good notes today as we've been going through, sharing some ideas, some insights, some concepts that are going to be helpful for you as you're supporting and serving your candidates and your hiring managers and all that kind of good stuff around hiring. I'm so excited for this conversation here with the team over at Modern Hire. So I have Carter and Chris here, and we're going to be talking through some of the things that they're seeing and serving the employers that they're working with across trends in candidate experience and some of those kinds of things. They do a lot of work in the screening space. It's what they're known for. It's what they're great at. And so I'm hoping to touch on some of that probably selfishly because I want to know more about what they're seeing, what those trends are. But Carter, Chris, so glad to have both of you here with me and looking forward to a great conversation. Before we dive into some of the good stuff that we're going to get to here for the audience, Carter, would you go first? Let us know a little more who you are and what you do, and then we'll pass that over to Chris.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, Ben. I'm an industrial psychologist by training at Modern Hire. I wear a lot of different hats. In one, I work on our professional services team. I do a lot of our ongoing analytics. So that's like turnover studies, business impact studies, adverse impact. So it's really just the ongoing support. So often with assessments, people focus on like, what assessment do you choose? But the reality is you have this assessment in place for many, many years. How do you make sure that it's working as well as it possibly could and aligned with your goals? Assessments are capable of doing so many different things. So how do we make sure that the company is getting what they want out of it? The other thing that I do quite a bit is that I lead a lot of our internal research. So like as consultants, there's kind of this expectation that we're going to be experts on a lot of different topics. And since we have so many clients, like so many, an individual at a company really only has line of sight to their jobs. We really have great data across companies and jobs and industries and countries. So one of the things that we do is that we try to do quite a bit of research. So we mine things like RFPs for like, what are people thinking about, and then use that to inform things. So things like completion rates and turnover and faking and all these types of things that we've seen, just making sure that we're able to come up with data informed expertise about these different issues.
Oh, goodness. I want to ask you about all those, by the way. All right, Chris, your turn.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for having us on, Ben. So similar background to Carter's, industrial organizational psychologist, been with the current company, Modern Hire, for a little over 10 years. So yeah, I do a lot of the similar work Carter does in terms of looking at those ongoing analytics, how well is an assessment working and such. But then also I serve one of my primary other roles as a project manager. And that really is more the initial implementation of an assessment. So I kind of have insight into both sides of things, right? It's when you're initially getting folks on board, when you're educating them about the assessment, how you want everything set up from a scoring standpoint, from an integration standpoint, all that kind of front end work. I'm involved with a lot of those projects, but then also get to see kind of the back end and lead the team that kind of optimizes or calibrates those assessments when they've been live for a year or two, and even beyond that, to really, everything Carter said, demonstrate the ongoing impact and modify it as they see fit. And that's, in terms of just Modern Hire, speaking more broadly, that's really the value I think we bring, and kind of one of our differentiators in the market is that, we don't just kind of set an assessment and forget it. We're always staying close to it. We're staying close with our clients. We view it very much as a partnership and want to continue to evolve the assessment based on data-driven analytic insights that our team's able to uncover.
All right, so we have a couple topics that I want us to cover in this conversation, but I want to go completely off script for 1 second and ask you a question that you were not expecting. All right, so we'll go with implied consent here. I'm curious about, because both of you have this very analytical scientist sort of approach to the work that you're doing. For the people listening into this, many of us don't have that IO psych background, that training, that focus, that specialty like you do. Any recommendations for the audience of HR, recruiting leaders, people who are listening into this, on how to be a little bit more scientific, more analytical, more data-driven? I know we don't want to pull the human out of every single equation, but we could probably stand to be a little bit more focused on the data sometimes and not just on how it feels or making someone happy or those kinds of things. Just a kind of broad question. Any suggestions or recommendations for the people listening in to be a little bit more like that in their daily work?
Yeah, I'll jump in here first. I think a big part of it is probably just curiosity and asking questions, right? I've heard that, some of the individuals that work for Modern Hire that don't have a similar background said what struck them about the PhDs at our firm is that they always have this curiosity, right? And kind of that healthy curiosity. So rather than assuming that a relationship is the way it is, or that A is causing B or A is causing C, let's actually at least consider a way we could look into this. Is there data that supports that? And usually there is going to be data. It just can be a challenge to actually pull that data out and look at it in a meaningful way, which is we typically come in and actually dive into it. But I think, yeah, just having that curiosity and don't just assume things are, aligning with your expectations or that one thing is necessarily causing the other, because it's always good to confirm that, or there might be something completely different going on that you don't suspect. So that's one thing I would just encourage folks to ask questions and be curious about what you're seeing.
I like that. Carter, anything else?
Yeah, I know for me, one of the things that's always struck me is that so many of our analyses and things that we do that end up resonating are not what we would expect them to be, that a lot of clients don't necessarily know like what data they have. So we start asking questions. They're like, oh, I've never really looked at that before. Like one of them that comes up quite a bit is like term reason. Like when you look at something like a turnover study, looking at like if you have reasons for why people separated from the company. We've done so many cool analyses that we show like, hey, look, there's a strong correlation between like your pre-hire assessment and people leaving for like these specific reasons. And they're like, oh, I've never even thought to look at all that stuff. Like that's coded for a totally. So like when it comes to predicting human behavior, like which is ultimately you're trying to do, like so much is siloed in different places, whether it's hiring and separation reasons and it's performance appraisals and all these types of things. Like it's all useful, but oftentimes it's just spread out across the organization. So it's just that there's oftentimes like huge untapped potential in just trying to bring all that together and learning more about the people that work for you.
Excellent. All right. Thank y'all for obliging me on that one, because that was a kind of fun thing. And I think everyone out there listening into this right now, that's a great set of recommendations for you. Think like let go of some of the things you think may be true, hold them loosely, I guess is the way to put it, and be more curious, think through things, be willing to ask questions, push back on things. Okay. Awesome. Wonderful. All right. So let's transition to some of the questions I had that I really want to grill you both and get some answers to, because you're seeing these things. You're obviously very data driven. So one of the things that we see in the data, it's been a couple of years now that it keeps coming up over and over again, is that candidates are telling us that they don't want to just throw the resume into a pile and then sit back and wait. They'd actually prefer an experience that's a little more interactive, a little more dynamic, right? Let me show what I can do. Let me test something, right? And it's been weird because I talk to employers who say, oh, well, assessments, that just drags things down and candidates hate them, but that's not what the candidates are actually telling us. I'd love to hear from you. Why do you think candidates actually crave that kind of experience? What's driving that sort of interest or that behavior there?
Yeah, I mean, so two things I could point to. One is critiquing aspects of resumes, and then two about the opportunity to perform. Like resumes are in a sense like a golden cow of hiring. Like decades ago, that really was one of the only sources, because there's so much stuff you can do in 2023 that you couldn't have done 10, 20, 30 years ago. And like you look at a resume, it's just a summary of like your education, your past jobs, your volunteer experiences, your license, all that type of stuff. And there's this assumption that like that is going to be the best understanding of who can do the job. The problem is it's always been like this arms race. Like you are applying for their job and you know they're looking at your resume, and the company's like, how do we get through all these resumes without like having to really spend time here? Like, how can we filter? So in a sense, it's almost like a solved issue. Like everyone's very cynical about it. I think ChatGPT has been a really interesting tool because it's like a final nail in the coffin. Like I've done this where I take my resume and then you can just take a job posting and say, can you tailor it to this? And it does like, that's like streamlined the last step, like tailoring your resume. And everyone already does it. And like we all know everybody does all of this. And the data is really clear here. Like the resume is not very predictive. And I think like we all understand that, but companies are like, well, you have to get a resume. Like you have to get a resume.
What's the alternative?
It's like, yeah, but it's like no one's getting value from this anymore. Because it's just like a game that's almost been solved on both ends. So I think in that sense, that golden cow is hard to move beyond. And applicants just don't think it's all that valuable because no one's getting hired exclusively from a resume, right? Like it's a filter. The goal of the resume is to get you past the resume filter to an interview. So they're like, why do we do that? Also, like what I've seen with our client data is it's oftentimes not a huge filter. Like sometimes we get that data on like people that applied and then how many they cut from the resume. And it's like, you cut like 10% of your pool. Like if you're cutting so few people, what were you even cutting on? Like it's an entry level job. So like, I think a lot of people have become cynical about it. And it's just a question of, is it worth anybody's time? And a lot of candidates are like, that's what they care about. Candidates have more leverage now than they used to. And they're saying, no, like, don't waste my time. It's wasting your time. It's wasting my time. Let's just not do this.
Yeah, I think, Carter hit on a lot of that, but I think, resumes became popular because they were the only best option, right? So that's what we had to use in the 60s and 70s. And we're creatures of habit. When something's been around for decades, it usually takes a while to displace it, right? People become comfortable with it. But, pretty much everyone knows on the surface, and certainly candidates knows that there's better opportunities out there. And I think, you're referencing kind of candidate research, Ben, and I think a lot of those candidates are likely relatively strong candidates, right? So that's something we've seen in our research is that good candidates or even average or slightly above average candidates want that opportunity to actually show what they can do, right? So the resume almost makes them feel like, it's not entirely a foolproof process, or it's not a fair process necessarily. Like they're not getting a fair shake because they just throw the resume on a stack and they're not even sure if someone looks at it, right? So at the very least, giving that perception to that candidate of here's this opportunity to demonstrate your skills is something that's certainly going to be, preferred by them. And it's just, like Carter said, in terms of just the predictive power of resumes, in our field, there's been a great deal of research done over decades, and resumes, while still relatively popular, have never really been a strong predictor of job performance. It's a screening tool, like you said. So I think in many ways, we almost have a screening tool set up today that's a big part of the value we think we get from our assessments and we tell our clients this, and the data bears this out, of just having an assessment in place, and you filter out those candidates who actually aren't even completing the assessment. And that in itself is a meaningful data point, and you're getting value from it just by requiring it. So that's almost kind of the today's version of a resume in some way, when you're filtering out those candidates who won't even go through an assessment. That I think is somewhat analogous to those candidates who would be filtered out, like Carter said, the bottom 10% of resumes.
I think there's also like an assumption that people don't want to be victims of their past experiences, and that a lot of the assumptions baked into resumes really aren't true. Like for a lot of entry-level jobs, I think of like call centers, distribution centers. We oftentimes will have content in our assessment that will ask about like past experience. Like, you worked in a distribution center before? Have you worked in a call center before? And I've seen a number of times where that's actually like negatively correlated with success, because something like a call center can be so idiosyncratic to that company that if they've got too much past experience, like they come in and they're like, this is how the job should be done, that oftentimes it's easier to train people that don't have that. Right. But the resume is like, but you did the job before, so you're going to be good at it. And it's like, sometimes that's true. For some roles, that's true. But there's also not very much empirical accountability. So like, you look at the resume and you're like, well, he's got a college degree, he's got past experience. And you're like, is that relevant for this job? Does it even matter? And I think a lot of applicants have that attitude, especially younger people, where they're like, this doesn't matter. Like, this isn't job relevant. I think that's where a lot of the lack of interest in resumes.
We've heard that directly from some of our clients, actually. Sorry to cut you off, Emma, just one more thing. Like, they've actually told us, in terms of experience, it's actually a bad thing if you had other, like call centers specifically that Carter mentioned, like, we want people fresh out of college or even high school, right? Like, because people, they've said, develop bad habits or do things differently than we do them here. So they actually, if you reverse code, if you will, like, we want those people that with no call center experience. Let us teach them the right way to do it. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things when Carter mentioned the Chat GPT thing a minute ago, it made me smile, because when I speak about automation and AI and hiring, I talk about how, it's essentially, it's one of us, or it's a computer trying to look at the best resume that either I could come up with or I could pay someone to come up with. And now I've got to throw that in, Carter, when I talk about this, or that you had Chat GPT help you finish up and create, because we're trying to decipher these things, and it's not meant for that, right? The human brain isn't meant to tease through those things. And I think that's why we see it's not very predictive. It's not very helpful at picking for the right person ultimately. And there are plenty of jobs, even y'all talked about, early career hiring, things like that, where every resume looks exactly the same. I've got little or no experience. I may have some education or not. Please hire me. And they all look the same. So the resume isn't doing anything to help you sift through the pile at that point either. So
I was gonna say, to me, I think the ultimate irony is that companies have been using AI to score resumes for years, and now the candidates can flip it back on them and use AI to create the resume. So it's like AI talking to AI, and like, really, this is just, it's ridiculous.
Yes, take that. Okay.
Exactly.
So in spite of the preference that candidates have for these more dynamic experiences, not just the resume, but something else beyond that, they prefer those things. As we've already talked about here, right? There's several things, the golden cow comment, Carter, some of the things are set up to say, yeah, but it's not going to work here, or that might be great for them, but here's the way we do it here. And there's a lot of probably pushback just waiting around the corner if we said, we're going to try something different. And so I'd love to hear from you when it comes to getting our stakeholders on board. What's the best way to do that? You're talking about assessments, and I think that's a great tool for us to do it. But just walk in and say, here's the assessment, I'm waving it around, and it's just the answer to all our problems. You're probably tying it back to, as you already pointed out earlier in your intros for each other, like some outcomes, some things that matter to the business. Talk about that a little bit, if you will, for those people listening in that say, all right, I'm on board. I hate the resume. It's not great. What else can I do? And how do I get my leaders on board for that?
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of things that are intuitive that end up not actually being accurate. So one of the hardest things to do in any application is to add additional content to it. Like, the trend the last decade has always been shorter, shorter, shorter. That's probably the number one feedback that we get, is like, hey, this assessment's great, it's working really well. It's going to be even better is if the assessment was shorter. And I feel like every other step of the application process has had this scrutiny. So when you come in and say, hey, I want to add like a 20-minute assessment to this, there's necessarily going to be pushback, because the concern is that whatever benefit we get from this is going to be negated by, we're going to lose additional candidates from dropout, or candidates won't want to take this, and I think that's a fair concern that they come up, because that makes intuitive sense, right? But the data actually suggests this really isn't true. Like, this is one of the interesting things that we've done with our own research, is looking at who's leaving. Like, we know that not everyone who starts an application finishes the application. And one of the things that we found when we've gotten client data from this, the very first page, like we always hear, like they drop during assessments, but nowhere else. Like when they apply for a job, they know they have to do these steps, but an assessment, that's a bridge too far. A fun study we did a few years ago with a client, actually was a distribution center. They gave us data on literally every single page of their application. The very first page where someone gets asked like their first name and their address, which you'd think every job is going to ask this, right? Like certainly you expect this. And 10% of their applicant pool dropped out on that page. So they apply for the job. They're like, what's your name? And they're like, no, I'm out.
Way too hard.
10%. And I think what's fascinating about this is that, like, this was a surprise to the company. Like, no one's necessarily looking at these things. The truth is, candidates are still browsing up until the first couple of weeks on the job, whereas a company sees an applicant as serious the second they click on the link. And the truth is, something like assessment dropout is closely tracked and monitored, because your vendor probably reports on that. Most of them do. Whereas all the other dropout, like, even though like this was like a Fortune 50 company with a like big staff, like when we told them that they lost almost 10% on the first page, they were like, what? Because they'd never even looked.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, yeah, we certainly get a lot of pushback from that perspective of something being too long and losing candidates, because that's like, a lot of it, I think, comes back to the unknown, right? Some of this is, you know, you might term like a black box, right? They're not aware of those candidates that are dropping out at that stage, and they might not be aware of how a score might be generated in an assessment, right? So if you know, compared to a resume, when you can directly compare these two sheets of paper, and regardless of how invalid or non-predictive that might be, they're still a little more tangible, where, you know, with our assessments, we generally report back, you know, maybe a 1 to 5 score on someone, right? How likely they are to succeed. And there's still, for folks that are using that, some ambiguity around the assessment a lot of times. Like, okay, where did that come from? Where maybe this, you hear the term like not a great test taker, maybe someone got a little overwhelmed, and like, how predictive is this supposed to be, type of thing. And just so the education, I think, around the assessment, and that's something we always try to do. You know, I mentioned my role as a project manager rolling out assessments, try to do as much education as you can around how this should be used and leveraged in your hiring practices. And that's something that I think gets at, you know, directly at your question here, Ben, is that we've always said, and the ideal use for assessments is to use them in combination with other selection techniques, right? We never propose that our assessments be used as a one size fits all, or like an end all be all, right? So
blindly hire whoever shows up at the top of the list, right?
Right, exactly. So we've said our assessments can do a really good job kind of at the extremes, like those candidates who are almost certainly to fail, like the bottom 10, 20%, like we can weed those out. We also do a pretty good job at identifying that very top tier, like if someone's clearly going to be a superstar, we can find those. But in terms of looking at, you know, someone in the 68th percentile versus the 57th, like those, there's very fine lines kind of separating those. So that's where you want to use your expert judgment, interview both of them, take a deeper dive into each of those candidates, because we know people in the field that are those hiring managers that may have been hiring into this role for 5-10 years. Like, clearly they have expertise. They know at some level what it takes to be successful. And the assessments that we have in place are just designed to supplement that. We're not replacing it. Here's just more data that you can use to make the best decision. So that talk track definitely has tended to resonate with them, and they're not being replaced, or this isn't being the only consideration for hiring.
But two things I do want to add just before we finish off this question is that when you have stakeholders that are pushing back on something, in some ways that's actually a good thing, because it means your stakeholders are invested in the process. They actually care about that. And the reason the reason they care about it is because it impacts them directly. So these are typically data-driven people. Like, if you can show why this is actually going to benefit them, this is going to help you address turnover, this is going to get you higher performers, like that type of argument is incredibly important to be able to make to these stakeholders. And you're going to have trouble doing that without like a robust hiring process. The other piece is just the transparency, that oftentimes corporate comes in and tries to steamroll something. They say, hey, like, we're smart, we have these advanced degrees, this is what we do. And they just try to shove something like an assessment down everyone's throat. And
don't just assume that every assessment out of the box is going to be the right fit for whatever job you're hiring for. I think that's the best way of putting this, because the pushback that I've heard, and I've heard from the audience listening right now, I've heard from some of you in the past when we talk about assessments as a hiring tool, you're like, yeah, but the assessments can't see everything. And guess what? They're not designed to. You already heard Chris and you heard Carter say they're not designed to see everything. They're designed to see pieces of the job that are very predictive of someone's success. And then it's up to us as humans to come in there and figure out the rest of those pieces of the puzzle. Anything I left out there, guys?
I was gonna say, I think the other thing that people don't really talk about, and I think vendors don't want to lead with this during the sales process, your best assessment is usually a couple of years after launch. Like, unless you're feeding it local data, adjusting the algorithm, improving group differences, improving it with local turnover data. So I think so often there's that fight up front to launch the assessment, but no one wants to talk about the years of work it takes you. Like, if you want to shorten your assessment, improve its prediction, like, it takes actual work.
I think I'd add too, there's certainly, just kind of add to your question almost, there's the tendency for stakeholders to kind of lock in to something they can actually see and something more tangible. So obviously, when we're able to get evidence around the assessment and predict quality of hire, that's a big step for us. And Carter said we're generally able to get that a year or two down the road. But, we do get some pushback as well, where you'd have a candidate that, for whatever reason, a manager is convinced will do very well in this role, and they have them go through an assessment. And if they don't do very well, then that can just crush all the buy-in and whatever you've built up in the assessment. So that can be a point of pushback as well. So it kind of speaks to your question around some of the hesitancy. There can be, we can have 1,000 candidates who have gone through it and discovered the assessment's very predictive. But if the manager sees one individual that should be a superstar that didn't do well, that they kind of latch onto that. So that's some of the resistance we fight as well, kind of speaking to that question.
Yeah, excellent. All right, good stuff. All right, so we are at our time. We blazed through all of this. I knew it was going to go very quickly. I'm going to make sure and tag both of you in the comments if you're okay with that. So hopefully you are, so that people can reach out and connect with you on LinkedIn, stay in touch with you, stay up to date on your work. Hey, everybody, if you're doing that, just ping them and say, hey, saw you on the live stream. Really enjoyed your insights. Even if you didn't, tell them anyway. But I also wanted to ask, as far as Modern Hire goes broadly, more as a company, is modernhire.com best place for people to go if they want to learn more about the work you are doing, how you're serving your clients?
Yeah, heading out to our website would be the best opportunity. There should be opportunities there to add your contact information as well, reach out for demos, reach out for those information. So it's pretty intuitive to be able to reach out to us via that. So yeah, that'd be the best spot.
And that's where a lot of our like white papers and stuff that Frosty and I put together over the years are all hosted on things like completion rates and turnover that we were talking about earlier.
Wonderful. All right. I know the audience out there is a little bit on the data nerd side, probably wants to see some of those things and learn more. So perfect. Thank you both for this conversation. I feel like I could go for another hour just grilling you, asking questions, diving into this stuff, because I enjoy it, and you're making a real impact, not just on the employers you're helping to serve, but on the candidates who are finding a company that values and appreciates what they can do, which is a really, really fun place to be. So thanks to both of y'all for joining me.
Great talking.
Thank you, Ben. Take care.
To everybody else out there, hang tight for more good stuff coming right up.
Awesome. What another great session there that we had there. So we are, Ben's going to be joining us here in a second. He's going to be refreshing. We're hoping to get our system back together on that end so we can get the chats live and updated on the platform with you guys. Continue, as we always continue to comment. We appreciate everybody commenting in the chat. We're going to be throwing some of those up here and there. And also, as a reminder, we're going to be using those comments, the people that are interacting and being a part of it, we're going to be using those at the end to pick out a handful of people to give a little special prize to for commenting and joining in with us. As we get prepared, we're going to be going to another session here. We got the great Ben Eubanks with us, and we're hoping that we're back and refreshed and up live. Ben, thank you so much for joining us again, man. I thought you were going to leave me for a while. I was getting nervous.
I wanted to leave you hanging for just a minute, George, let you just stretch it out just till it was a little bit uncomfortable and then come in and save the day. So here I am.
I mean, I can talk. It'd just be, be a lot of things that we can talk about. But man, talking about the different assessment, one of my favorite lines in there is AI versus AI. Like, I got this thing in my head for some reason that I want to have a battle of Ben AI versus another AI data, and just see whose data, who can talk data the best, AI versus AI Ben.
Oh, goodness. Well, I play at it, but the computers are better. Well, a lot of the research we have shows that the computers are going to beat us out on some of those kind of analytical things, but it comes to us to share it, to be the communicators, to be the ones that support people. So there's a good breakdown there, and we can do the things we're meant to do. All right. So this has been so much fun. Some great insights there from the team at Modern Hire. Again, I smiled every time Carter would call Chris Frost is his name. He'd call him Frosty. And every time he did that, I'd smile a little bit. So that was a really great session. Thank you to both you guys for that. Our last conversation here is coming up before we dive into some of the research findings with me and George is with Jeff Beckham from GEM. And so Jeff and I had a chance to talk through some of the data points that were relevant to the work they're doing, the way they're serving the employers and the candidates that they are impacting. We talk about some of the DEI pieces, which I know George is going to get very excited about. We also talked just a bit about the things we were edging into with the Modern Hire conversation about balancing the human and some of the automation stuff we can do. Right now, we have the tools to basically let a candidate apply and get a job offer. Like the entire thing can be automated. But where's that line we should draw about where we should and where we shouldn't do those things? So we talk a little bit about that and the benefit to us as talent leaders, as recruiters, but also the benefit to the candidate populations we're serving as well. So some really good stuff there. And we're going to dive into this one. Let's go.
Everyone, I know we've had some great conversations today. And for our last one, I'm so excited to be here with Jeff because we're going to be talking about some really great insights from the research, some of the things that Jeff and the team at GEM are seeing in the marketplace. And again, it's going to be a great discussion, very practical, lots of good takeaways for all of you. Jeff, so glad to be here with you and looking forward to this.
Me too. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get to some of the fun stuff for the audience, take a minute and tell us who you are and what you do, please.
Yeah, I head up product marketing at GEM, and I joined the company after facing the classic problem of trying to hire and having not enough good people apply to my roles. And then I saw this cool product called GEM that helped me, and I knew I wanted to be a part of it. And then the whole me bringing in the home life is I got a little 2-year-old at home that keeps me busy pretty much all day and sometimes in the night too.
There's no second shift where you can just hand that one off. You're on duty all times pretty much. Okay.
That's my shift.
Hey, I'm with you on that one. When our kids we learned after the first two, we had twins at first and we're like, oh gosh, this is crazy. The second or the third, the fourth one, we're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. You get this day, I get that day. And that way we're both not running at like 40% capacity all the time. We have to have one responsible adult in the house at all times. So it was a fun split. We figured that one out eventually. So good stuff. So for everybody listening into this, again, you mentioned GEM, you had seen this product. So I'm hoping some of that comes out in the conversation because I've seen what the team over at GEM is doing and it's pretty incredible, solving some big problems for recruiters and employers out there. And I want to take a second and just cast a big vision a little bit or cast a wide net here. You get a chance in your role to talk with a bunch of different talent leaders, different companies, different industries. It's this broad spectrum there. I'd love to hear from you because what we see in the market is there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of variety going on. And I'd love to get your take on that. What's most critical right now?
When I talk to TA leaders, it very much depends who I talk to, the way that they feel about things. If I'm talking to someone in tech, they're just trying to get by. Everyone's seen the layoffs and other news, focus on fixing processes, backfilling the roles. And if you talk to someone outside tech, like we have a great customer in the manufacturing world, they're just trying to get butts in seats as fast as possible. And it's a totally different game. And in some cases, like another person I talked to recently heads up TA at a FinServe company, they're asking, how can we capitalize on the tech talent and bring them into our company because we need them to digitally transform?
That's one of the things we're actually seeing in the data. We asked a question this year in the study around, are you finding more talent available because of some of the layoff stories that are happening, some of the news that's happening where people are losing jobs through no fault of their own. They're good candidates. They're suddenly on the market and surprisingly for them. And we're finding a lot of employers are telling us, yes, absolutely. We're finding them and snapping them up as quickly as we can because all of a sudden we have access to this talent pool that previously was either out of our budget range or was just inaccessible to us because they were at a company they were pretty happy at.
Yeah. That's exactly what I'm hearing. And it's, in some ways the tech misfortune is maybe helping other industries grow faster.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good time. And you mentioned the financial services company, and the thing that I think about every time I talk to a leader, regardless of what company they're in, I was talking to a big healthcare company recently, doesn't matter what space people are in, they're all becoming tech companies because they have more tools, more tech in the stack, all these kind of things. And so when they get a chance to say, oh yeah, we'll pick up that whatever, I'm not a technology person, but pick up one of those people, network engineer, whatever else, like those kind of people. Yes, let's grab them, because like I said, they might not be available next month when we decide we want them, or next year when we decide we're going to come around to that. So let's get them while we can. And so a lot of companies have been operating at a deficit when it comes to their open positions and just trying to figure out how to get by. And now they have the chance to fill some of those roles and take some of the pressure off. So it's really, really a good place to be. Okay, so that's a big picture vision for everybody out there listening in. And you probably already knew that. Depending on the space you're in, you may say, yes, Jeff, I'm on this side, I'm on that side. Doesn't matter. When it comes to some of the other trends, the other things that we're seeing in the data, one of the things that stands out for me, and I can't wait to get your take on this because it's something that's been really interesting to watch, is this focus on DEI in the hiring space. And so we have seen for years now that it's been in the top 5 priorities for employers. Sometimes it's the number 1 spot, sometimes number 2, but kind of hovering up there at the top. But when we talk to employers, they're like, yes, we know it's important. Any recommendations of what we should do? And so I'd love to hear from you. When you're working with these different companies, how are they making this a priority? What are they doing to make sure practically, tangibly, they're making this a priority in their everyday activities?
Yeah. Well, to build on your big picture view, a lot of companies are making these public commitments, and maybe some are succeeding, but a lot aren't. And they're really asking, well, what do I need to do? And I mean, a couple of things that we see is, the first is just, do I even have the data to know if what we're doing is working and contributing to the diversity objectives? And then once you have the data, do you have it at a specific enough level to say, look at your funnel and say, is our interview process equitable? Are people from different backgrounds dropping out at different rates, in which case we have to relook at pretty much everything? That's something that, the GEM product can do, of course. And then another thing is just more in terms of the TA process, right? Something we do at GEM that we got inspired to do from some of our customers is actually have a diversity sourcing period. So when a new role opens up, you can't even put it online until you spend 2 weeks sourcing diverse talent, just to make sure that that's a consideration in the process. And that's really helped us make major gains there. And I know it is for a lot of others as well.
I like that approach because it's in some cases, it's like a check the box or an afterthought. And in that case, it's an intentional first step before we do anything else. I like the approach there. And by the way, for anybody listening into this, if you have other things you're doing to focus on that, to prioritize that, to say, we're trying to be a little more equitable in our hiring, more inclusive, go ahead and drop that in the chat. Let us know what you're doing. I'd love to hear from some of you, and the rising tide lifts all ships. So if you may share something that you're doing, just like Jeff just did, that could help anybody else out there listening in to also pick up another idea to help them out. Jeff, back to your first point on the data piece on that. One of the things we see in the research is that more companies are saying we're actually using, like you're saying here, analytics to figure out where people are falling out of the process, and to say, hey, well, look at this. We're getting, 50% women into the top of the funnel, but the second or third step in, there's only 10% left. What's going on in there? What's happening there? And so they're using that as a way to sort of filter through that. And it sounds like what you're talking about here, about having some clearer data through your entire hiring funnel to be able to say, hey, we don't know what the issue is, but we can pinpoint where an issue might be. Is that for in your data set, the data set that a customer can use on the GEM side? Is that like by women? Is that by racial diversity? What sort of filters do you have available there?
Yeah, we have both of those, race, gender, and ethnicity as well. So you can look at every step of the funnel, break it down by that. And another thing that customers have found helpful is just benchmarks on this. I mean, it's one thing to know what you're doing in a silo, but how are we doing compared to everybody else? That's something the product's able to provide, just so folks can have confidence in we're doing well or not well.
Okay, that's one of the first questions I always get is, hey, this is great. And someone might have already posted that in the comments in this session saying, okay, yeah, but how do I compare or stack up against everybody else? We always want to know what's going on there. One of the other things, bringing it back to some of the tangible ideas that we talked about a minute ago, one of the other things we're seeing in the data is that employers are doing things like, hey, we're going to make sure that when it comes down to it, our recruiting teams, the people who are putting in front of candidates to screen them, everything else, they actually look like the candidate population we're trying to source and bring into the company. We don't have this homogenous group that all look and talk and act the same, because guess what? They all have the same blind spots, the same set of biases probably. So trying to make sure that the hiring teams are using reflects the kind of people they want to bring into the organization. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I see that a lot as well, and it's smart. And maybe the piece I'd add to that is it actually has to be a good place to work for diverse talent because there's lots of ways that people can find out what the culture is like. And so, like, actually making it good matters more than everything else. And then, of course, showcasing that representation in the hiring process.
Yes, there's all these different pieces. We're talking about like the actual interviews and screenings, but there's even at the very front end, like, does your career site represent the kind of company that you want candidates to see you as and who you're trying to be? It may be a little aspirational, but being open about that and being committed to that publicly is a good place to start there. It pains me to say it, but I talked with a leader recently that was placed, given the additional title of being head of diversity for a company a few years ago. And she's like, okay, well, sure, I'll step into that role, but what does that mean? How can I do this? What resources do I have? Like, well, we don't have any resources for you. We just need you to be the figurehead essentially. And she was so torn up about that. And so that's why I've been so excited about some of the companies that are really leaning in to say, we're focused on this and we're making this tangible. We're making this practical. We're bringing this to the forefront. We're doing real things to move the needle on that instead of just in word, but actually in deed. And that's a great place to be there. One of the other things on the diversity front that we see in the data is we actually look at the candidate side. So part of this research, obviously I've talked about some of the stats already, come from the employer side, but some of the data comes from candidates. And one of the things we actually see when we look at racially diverse candidates is they much prefer on a career side during the hiring process, in the communications they're getting from the employer, they want to see other people like them. They want to see a day in the life. They want to understand what it's like working at that company tangibly day to day, not just the, oh, here's our corporate culture video that everybody spends lots of money on that candidates don't actually appreciate that much based on the research, but really spending some time helping them understand what it would be like, how they can picture themselves in that role, just like someone else. They're really trying to make that tangible. And that's what those candidates prefer more than any other group in the data set.
Yeah. And to take that even a step further, another thing is they want to actually meet the people that they'd be working with. Mm-hmm. Another financial services company, they were having trouble attracting data scientists, right? And the problem was there was just this perception that this company is kind of boring and outdated and not a place you'd want to work. You want to go to Amazon for this kind of role. And what they found is they had a lot better luck attracting talent when they put the team out there doing, building talent communities, having webinars describing the work that they're actually doing. So like that applies broadly to specific functions and roles as it does to diverse talent specifically.
That actually aligns with a study we did a couple of years ago where we asked candidates, what do you want to see in the hiring process? Who do you want to see? And unfortunately for all of us listening, for all you listening in here, right, they want to see HR and recruiters like dead last. They get plenty of us. It seems like they don't need any more of us. What they wanted to see was either the leader they'd be working for directly or people who would be on the team where they'd be working to understand more about, like, okay, I know what the company's like, but tell me what this team's like. Because even within the company, there's little subcultures and team dynamics and other things that never come through a job description. And you hope to pick up those things so you can make a more accurate choice as a candidate sometime before you get hired and find out, oh, I didn't know that was going to be there. And so they like being able to interact, like you're saying here, with some of those people, even if they're just seeing it one way, right? One-way communication, not interactive, but being able to hear from them, that helps them to make a better and more informed choice as a candidate. And let's face it, today, even in spite of some of the headlines and things, like you said earlier, there are other companies that are hiring quickly and just as rapidly as they ever have. And because of that, it's still a candidates market in many cases. They have choices. They're sifting through offers to see who they want to work for. And some of the things that you and I are covering here are really key factors they're using to discern and choose which employer they're going to let be their next employer, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So the last kind of big thing I wanted to capture with you here in this conversation is around automation. I know that y'all support a lot of this with your customers and really enable them to be more capable, more effective, all those things. The big thing that we're seeing in the data is that more employers are considering these tools, are leaning into them, are saying they're actually adding value, but they're not saying, let's just automate the heck out of everything and keep all the humans at bay and not interact with our candidates. No, it's like, let's use these tools to be a little more personal, to be a little bit more human, to be a little bit more connected to the people that we're actually trying to support. I'd love to hear from you what you think that means when they're using these tools in terms of candidate satisfaction, in terms of recruiter satisfaction with their actual jobs and tasks. What do you think that sort of impact looks like?
Yeah, I mean, starting on the recruiter side, I get a pretty similar story from every recruiter I talk to. Is they say something along the lines of, "I wish I just had more time to talk to candidates. I'm pulling my hair out, entering data, like building reports and all of this stuff. Like it's important stuff, but it's not why you necessarily got into the profession. You want to talk to people. You want to explain why you should work at this company. You want to close people, and so." Automation can be great there, helping with data collection. Your hiring manager wants to know what's going on with the pipeline for the role. You should be able to just click a couple times and just say, here you go, check it out. You want to send email out. You should be able to have a sequence that gets customized based on a few fields, but you don't have to manually send every single one. And in this new era we're in with AI, you should be able to have Chat GPT help you make a draft of that email. Why not? You can edit it after, of course.
I was waiting to see if Chat GPT was going to come into the conversation today at some point, and there it is. I knew someone was going to drop it on us.
It's only the growing app of all time.
Hey, there you go. There you go. So for all of you listening in out there, I'd love for you to take a cue from what Jeff just said, and just take a second and pop in the chat the thing that you love most about recruiting, right? Whether you've done it before and you're now leading a team, whether you're doing recruiting day to day, whatever it is, what do you enjoy most about it? Because if I had to guess, if I put my fortune telling hat for a second, most of you aren't going to say, I really, really love screening 150 resumes, or filtering through this and handwriting a bunch of emails to people, or whatever else. We don't enjoy those things. The things we do enjoy come back to what you said, Jeff, like really being able to build a relationship with someone, to understand how this job is a fit for them, and to, whether you like it or not, it is selling, right? Sell the culture, sell the company, sell the role, get them committed to that, and get them to accept that offer. That's a really exciting moment. That's a kind of a high. But if we put all that away and ignore how it makes us feel to do that, on the candidate side, you're helping them find something that's hopefully moving them towards their ultimate career goals and aspirations. And that's incredible, right? You don't get that kind of excitement out of supply chain and some of the other spaces out there. Like, they don't get that impact on people. So that's the joy that I get from that. So we talked a little bit about the recruiter side. What do you think that means on the candidate experience side, Jeff, in terms of how the automation piece fits into that?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it I think you just hit on is, if the recruiters can use automation better, they can be more attentive to the candidates. Like, who likes to wait 4 days to hear back after their interviews? That's really tense, of course, right?
Yes.
But there's some other things that I'm excited about from an automation perspective. And some of these things happen, but they're just in very small pockets. Let's say someone reaches out to you for a job and you're not actively looking. Your resume is probably not up to date as a result. But then they're saying, oh, cool, this sounds interesting. Can you go to our website and apply and give us your resume? It's like, well, I don't have one. You should be able to one-click apply for this kind of stuff. Or similarly, yeah. It's a big pet peeve of mine. And then similarly, when you go to a career site, if you're trying to look at a big company, there's a lot of jobs out there. And especially if you're maybe earlier in your career and you don't even know the exact field, or like, say you're in sales, there might be 5 different business units that you could be a sales rep at, right? And so how can the career site be smart and help you find what you need without just clicking around everywhere, right? So there's great chatbots and other things that can help you do that kind of stuff and make your life better and easier.
That's actually what we see in the candidate research. We ask, again, if you read just the headlines, candidates hate all AI. They're terrified of it. It's going to ruin their jobs and whatever else, right? What we actually find, we ask them is, where could companies use automation in the hiring process that would actually help you? And the number one way is helping to match them to an actual job that fits who they are. They actually want companies to be using tools to help with that, because like you said, I'd liken it to walking into a library and saying, okay, I'm just going to blindly walk over and pick, oh, this is the book for me. I'll blindly walk around to the next shelf and pick another one. You can do that all day and never find the right one for you. Or you could log into whatever account you use that knows what you've bought for the last 5 books, and it says, hey, here's the next best recommendations. We know what you've already liked. And the same thing applies in the job context. Candidates want it to be simple, easy. Don't drag it out. Don't make it onerous, because then I'll just skip over and find some other company that has already solved this and apply for a job on their website. So there we go.
Yeah. AI is a scary word, but then we love different things that use AI and we just don't realize. Like, who doesn't love when you buy something on Amazon or wherever, and it's, what about this other product that you might be interested in? Like, those are value add things, but if it was phrased as AI. I don't know, maybe it becomes scary at that point.
There's a great book written a couple years ago called Prediction Machines. And the way the authors put it is AI helps us predict things faster. It shouldn't be a decision machine. It should be a prediction machine, and help us to when it's doing it in the hiring context. It's, hey, we're predicting based on some of the signals we can see that Jeff is going to be a great fit for this next role. But we're not blindly saying, just go and pick Jeff and good luck to you. Use your discernment, use your creativity, use your expertise to filter through that and find that out. And that ties it really well back into the first part of this conversation on the recruiter satisfaction element. Is that's what recruiters bring that an algorithm can't bring, right? Some of that's collaborative aspect of helping the candidate find the right role for them and making sure that they're prepared for the interview and all those things. Like, I loved doing those things hands-on when I was recruiting years ago. And that's what probably brings a lot of joy to the leaders out there listening in that are still doing some of those things day to day. All right, so we're getting close on our time. I'm going to make sure and tag you here in the comments, tag your LinkedIn profile so people can reach out, can connect, can follow you. Just let Jeff know, y'all out there, just let him know that you heard him on the session today and enjoyed it, learned some new things, got some good tips and ideas. But if someone wants to learn more about Jim, I think we have that 2023 recruiting trends report. We're going to drop that link in the chat as well. Is that good for you?
Yeah, that works great. And then there's, of course, our website, gem.com. If you were just to do a search, you might see the vitamin company, Gem, which is not us. We're Gem, the recruiting software company.
So if you end up with vitamins on your doorstep, you went to the wrong place. Gem is for recruiting. So thank you so much, Jeff. This has been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed the conversation, got some good ideas out of it as well. And I know the audience has too. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. To everybody else out there, stay tuned for more coming up.
Okay, goodness. Had some great insights there from Jeff, and I'm loving watching the chat, George, as always, seeing the comments, the shares, people saying, well, this is working for us, or we tried that, don't do that. I love learning alongside and from each other as part of the process, because that's a big part of how we all get better. Anyway, so some good stuff there. Anything stand out to you in the session from Jeff? I know we talked on some of the DEI stuff that probably is near and dear to your heart. What's your take?
It's every time we do these sessions, Ben, there's always like a theme thing, right? The keywords, the transparency sticking out a lot. Keeping it, in plain fashion, keeping things real and really connecting. I like the question that you threw in regards to what do you get as a recruiter? What are you getting out of it? Seeing some of these people commenting about, connecting to somebody's story, being able to put people in the right position, seeing them get their dream job, even if it's not with us. When there was such a talent, phase where it was hard to, retain talent, find talent in that world, to be able to see people say, you know what, this is not a good fit for you, but I know another company or another in a position. So finding those people in the recruiting stage, having that heart to know, hey, I know I have a void to fill, and I'm not just going to fill this void with just anybody that's going to cost more money, more time, starting back over phase one, and that person's unhappy. They don't love our company, and our company's great, our culture is great, but then we put them in a bad position. And so I think it's important as recruiters are looking into the hiring practices and they're using AI, or they're using these assessment tools and things of that nature, still keeping human within the resource of making those decisions. I think it's important to make sure that we don't just try to fill that seat. That's so important. Be transparent that we need this position, but I feel best if you were in said position, or you're here and this is what I recommend for you. How can I get you to where you want to be, because you are great for whatever you're bringing to the table. I think that's so important that we keep that mindset. And I would encourage people, because I know it's so hard, Ben, that you just want to fill that seat. You want to grab the good people.
There's pressure.
It's so authentic. I always talk about be authentic in your words and your actions. Do that when it comes to recruiting as well, not just fill a void for a need for now that you have to restart and take the patch off of later.
Absolutely. Excellent. Awesome. I had fun with you because you have experience as a hiring manager, as a hiring leader, but not necessarily as a recruiter. So I love being able to kind of play back and forth on, I've got the recruiting experience, a little bit less than the hiring manager experience. And so it's kind of fun to see the perspectives here. And all right, good stuff. All right. Hope all of you are getting some good notes, some good takeaways, as I've said already from the conversation. I've got a long list of people who are going to be winning some prizes at the end, and we'll be continuing to grab a couple more names as we're going through here. So chime in. We're about to start sharing some of the data, some of the research really quickly. I'm going to flash up here. Here's here's what we're planning to cover for the next 40 minutes or so. So we've got a little bit of time set for George and I to go through some of the data. I'll take the lead on that because I'm the data nerd. You've already probably established that piece of it. But I'm going to ask George to comment. He'll chime in on some of those things. Then he's got some specific data points he wants to talk about in there. And then we'll finish up, give some prizes away. We'll announce who those are. We'll let you know how to get credits for this, all those kind of good things towards the end. So stay tuned, stick around, and you'll find out if you are a winner. Okay, I think we're ready. George, are you ready? I think I'm pumped up for this.
Born ready. I'm ready to hear you be excited. There's nothing
always.
like a data smile.
Oh gosh. Okay. So we're going to dive into some of the research here, and I'm going to try to tell some stories for you. I'm going to try to share some data points, some examples and things. So it's not just me throwing a bunch of charts at you. If you watch closely, there's only, I think, one chart for me and one for George. The rest of it's just pulling some key stats and things. So it's very consumable for you. Hopefully you'll get some good takeaways. And obviously you can save the link to this. So you can come back to it later and watch it again. Feel free to take screenshots. Let me know. I'll do the superhero pose or something like that in the middle of that. Now, all right, so let's dive into it. Let's have some fun. So the reason I love sharing the research with all of you, the reason I get so excited about this is because we know that disruption is constant. I was writing a piece earlier today about looking at hiring in the last couple of years, and it went from nothing to everything. And then now it's kind of this weird in between, as we already heard from the conversation earlier with Jeff, based on what industry you're in, what company size you're in. We're seeing some different trends there. And the thing that reminds me of is years ago, my dad actually we had a storm come through. My dad had a building kind of like the one you see here, and a piece of the roof blew off. And he was upset about this. I got to go fix that. I got to get around to it. I said, hey, let me do it. If you've heard this story before, just bear with me. But these hands were not meant to fix things. They're great at typing. They're great at designing slides. They're not so great at repairing physical things. But I, for whatever reason, said, let me give it a try. So I go over there. I've got all my tools and everything else. And I put the ladder up and realize I can't even get onto the roof. It doesn't reach. I'm failing and haven't started yet. So I realized if I back the truck inside the building and put the ladder in the back of the truck, I can climb out. Okay. I'm from Alabama. That's a thing we do. Okay. So here we go. So I climb onto the roof. I pull my materials out. I patched the roof, and I'm going to tell you, it looked incredible. It was the most amazing thing I'd ever done. And I could not believe that this was the work of my own hands. So I couldn't wait to get down and tell everybody else about this great work I'd done. And then I realized, as some of you may already have realized, that I just closed the hole that I climbed out of to get onto the roof. And so, like, spoiler alert, I got down. Okay. I'm here today. I didn't break any bones or anything else. I was able to find a way to get down carefully. But I love telling that story because when we solve one problem, when I patched that hole, I created a different problem. And sometimes in recruiting, it feels like whack-a-mole. You solve one problem and something else comes up. We finally caught up to the pace, and then this other thing changes. And so as we're sharing some of the data with you today, I want you to keep that in mind, that you're like, okay, I may have this one, but something else is going to be coming around next. And so I love sharing the numbers and the things with you because it's going to help you see what's coming, what's next, and get you prepared for that so you can prepare the rest of your team, the rest of your function, the rest of your department, all those kinds of things, even your other leaders in the business, your stakeholders. You'll know how to address them and what to talk about as priorities there. All right. So really quickly, here's the research coverage for those of you that are, in-depth data nerds like me. You want to know, okay, who'd this cover? So we surveyed 1,000 global candidates, most of those U.S., but some outside U.S., as well as 1,000 plus employers, same kind of thing. And you see the company sizes there. I share that just to say this is a really big study. Statistically, it represents the workforce. It represents the candidate population out there and the employers out there. So it's not a survey of 7 of Ben's closest friends. This covers a lot of different things. In terms of topics, we do not have time. I've already told you, we don't have time to get into all of these topics, but I wanted to give you a preview of what this covers because the report's coming up. I'll give you some more details on that towards the end, but this is what we're going to cover. It covers every single aspect of hiring today, screening, what candidates are looking for, how we can adjust, what budget priorities are, all those kinds of things. All that's going to be in the final report. And if you see something in there, you're like, oh, I just got to see this, I want to know more about that, I'll give you a way to reach out to me or my team later on just to get an insight, get a preview of that if you want to. All right. That said, let's dive into some of the fun stuff. So I'm going to run through and share a couple of the headlines, some of the big priorities for employers. Again, just to give you a feel for some of the big things we're seeing in the data. And then we're going to transition to the candidate side, show you some of the things that are changing, ebbing, flowing, what the priorities are there before we start to wrap up the session today. So on the employer side, one of the things that I want you to hear is, even though the headlines are saying that these companies are laying off, this industry are laying off, I'm even seeing the chat here for some people saying layoffs, not a chance. Okay. It's still a candidate-driven market for many industries, for many companies. If we actually look in the data, if you want to know where that breakdown is, because you're like, well, it's all these mixed signals, what we see is the very large companies are the ones who are holding off or who are reducing their headcount, reducing their hiring volume for this year, or certain industries like software, technology, those. But the others are going either as fast as they were last year, or some of them even expect their volume to increase this year. So that's your shot across the bow just to understand what that piece is. Overall, in terms of what that means for you practically, tangibly, we're seeing some reductions in things like budget or headcount, but not a lot. I mean, it's like small, minor adjustments compared to last year. Overall, still very positive, still very, very much a growth space. If you're in TA, you've got some job security, hang on to it, because there's a wild ride coming down the line. We're seeing some real interest in recruiting automation. We'll talk about that in a bit, just to touch on that a little bit. You heard from some of the conversations today about that as a priority. We're seeing ways to use tools not to replace us. I have zero interest in that, but I have a lot of interest in saying, get these things off my plate that I don't enjoy, that are kind of robotic, that are kind of repetitive, so I can focus my effort, my time, my expertise on being an incredible contact and communicator for these candidates and really engaging with them. So I'll share with you in a little bit what employers are doing if they're using automation. I'll share with you how they're actually adjusting that time for their recruiters to spend more time on things that really does matter. And last but not least, ghosting, transparency, remote work. We've heard all of those pieces of it in the conversation already today. That's a priority, and it's going to continue to be for some time. So the first question we ask on the employer study is, what are your priorities for the coming year? So we gathered this earlier this year, about a month and a half ago. So for the coming year, what are your big priorities? And this is what we're seeing from employers across the board. So the biggest priority is, how are we putting ourselves out there? Recruit marketing. How are we engaging with candidates? How are we appealing to them? How are we attracting and putting our brand out there in a way that matters to candidates? How are we making sure it's a meaningful sort of thing we're doing? D&I is up there as a big priority. Again, George is going to comment on some of those things in a little bit. Candidate experience is a priority. On down the list. What's interesting to me is things like hiring manager relations. If I asked any of you, like spot on, hiring managers, what's your relationship like? Many of us have this kind of battling relationship with hiring managers where we're trying to solve this problem, that we both want to solve the same problem, but we don't always know how to do that in a way that is meaningful and that salvages that relationship. For the first time I've ever seen it, recruiting automation jumped up into the top 6. And we've measured this for 5 years now. And so that surprised me to see that sort of transition change. We saw interest in that after the pandemic started and things shook up, and we expected to see more of that, and we absolutely did. So I'll share some of the stats with you on that in just a bit. So if you want a number to put on this, in the data, we asked employers, are you planning on increasing, holding steady, or decreasing your hiring volume? Only 7% of the overall employers we surveyed said they're planning on reducing their hiring. Okay, as I said, that's industry, that's company size, that's overall, that's what you see, the breakdown there. What's interesting to me is I asked some questions about how your work as talent leaders fits into this bigger puzzle. How does that affect a company and their ability to compete for talent? And what we saw is the majority of employers said that if we are reducing our recruiter headcount, if there are some of those companies out there that are laying off recruiters or putting them out of work, those companies are becoming less competitive when it comes to talent, when it comes to finding and recruiting the right people. We know that. Absolutely. We understand that. Logically, it makes sense, but I wanted a number to put on that just to reinforce when we go back to leaders and say, I know this may seem like a good idea right now, but this is short-term thinking. We're missing out on our chance to have a bigger impact, right? If they reduce headcount over there at the competition, we can actually take them on. We can steal those candidates away. We can, snag those candidates they're gonna miss out on because we have the right recruiting talent. So if you're one of those employers right now that's in that boat, it's like, I don't know what we're going to do, or we're kind of slowing down. What does that mean for us? Here's some ideas for you. We actually asked talent leaders just like you, how do we actually respond to this? What should we be doing? How should we make sure that we're not losing our recruiters? So some of the things like improving your processes, really focusing on candidate experience, more training, more development. One of my good friends, Kelly from Lineage Logistics, she's a TA executive, amazing woman. And she and I had some conversations about this before, and it was actually her recommendation to ask this question for the survey. So Kelly, hats off to you. I was really excited to see the responses here. And these give us some ideas and some opportunities to think about what other ways can we reuse, repurpose our TA assets, people, resources, we're going to call them, so we don't have to lose them when things slow down. Okay, so I'm going to admit that I actually lied to you. I forgot I had one more chart in here, one or two maybe, on what we're doing to adapt things. So I talked about recruiting automation a bit, and I want you to look at this right here. So we asked the question, are you seeing more efficiency from AI, automation, chatbots, all those things? We kind of lump them together and look at this. Compared to 2 years ago, 40% more employers are saying they are seeing real improvements in there. So if you're one of those companies that's saying, yeah, we're not sure yet, or we're not using it yet, this only captures those who are using it currently, but they're seeing some incredible benefits of leveraging the technology. If you're not sure about where to start doing that, look for places that are highly repetitive, that are very routine, that are not very human focused, that are more process or task focused. Those make great opportunities for you to think about automation. And I've already seen one of my good friends out here in the audience. I'm going to give a quick shout out because I had a chance to speak to her organization recently. They're in the healthcare space. And one of the things that crossed my mind, so talking to these leaders across their different functions, across their different aspects of the medical, the clinical side of the business, their chief nursing officer, their head of cardiology, all those kinds of people in the room. Like, why am I here? I can talk to HR leaders. I can talk to people just like all of you for anytime, easily. But why am I here talking to these leaders? And the second I finished talking about some of the things that are happening in the marketplace around the scarcity of talent and the availability of candidates is dropping off, I shared all those kinds of things. And then their leader gets up and talks about some of their SWOT analysis that shows some of their biggest risks as a business are the lack of talent availability, not being able to find enough people for certain critical roles in the business. It's like, okay, now it makes total sense to me. You are probably working for one of those organizations. The research I did for the book that just came out recently, and a lot of the data that we're seeing show that employers are struggling to find the right kinds and types and quality of talent they're looking for, even though we see at the same time some of these headlines, as I said earlier, saying layoffs and other stuff. Even in spite of those things, these are still true. Some of the underlying factors that are driving scarcity are still there, and they're going to continue to be there for a long period of time to come. So if you're one of those companies, know you're not alone, but also know that you don't have to just keep banging your head against the wall and hoping for the best, because there are some better and smarter ways to attack this. And part of that comes from understanding what candidates are looking for. So let's flip over to the candidate side here, talk about that for a bit. All right, a couple quick things. Number one, candidates tell us in the research they do not mind AI or automation. Overall, they're pretty fine with it. They don't want an algorithm giving them a job offer, but they are okay with things like using tools, using smart software to help match them to jobs, to help them understand which opportunities are best for them, to help understand their skills and their future potential. That's a really big one. We see candidates that are really interested in these sorts of things for helping them create a more valuable and engaging and personal hiring process. But if it's just let's keep them at arm's length, let's move them along the assembly line, if it feels like that to them, they're not nearly as interested. They really want to feel valuable and high touch. And yes, we can use tools to help do that. All right. Speaking of screening experiences, we already talked about some of these things earlier in the conversation with Modern Hire, but applicants are telling us they want engaging and dynamic screening experiences. They actually prefer, when we ask candidates, listen to this, because I talked to some leaders that say, yeah, assessments, and I know there's some chatter, there's people that are for it, people that are against it. There's kind of this middle ground. People are like, okay, they're great. What we see from candidates is that they prefer a screening experience that allows them to demonstrate what they're about. And that doesn't have to be necessarily a technical assessment. It can be. But in some of you were talking about things like job shadowing, things like being able to sit down and do a quick experience and walk through a project or walk through a task as part of that hiring process. There were some great comments in the chat earlier for people that are doing that. Candidates prefer that. They're looking for that. They don't want to just throw their resume in the hat, cross their fingers, and hope for the best. They're looking for something a little more dynamic, a little bit more connected, because it allows them to put their best foot forward. It allows them to know what the company's looking for, and it allows them to really understand what matters most in that job. All right. Pay transparency. We talked about this a bit, but when we ask candidates about a list of 15 different things, what matters most to you in the hiring process, pay transparency is number one. It's a big deal. And there are some demographic differences in that, as you probably would imagine. For example, women we're 25% more likely than men to say that is their biggest priority. They care more about that than anything else. It could be because they've been underpaid in previous roles. It could be for a lot of different reasons, because they feel like it makes it a more fair negotiation process. It doesn't matter. That's still a priority, and they place more emphasis on it than the men do in the data. And last but not least, here's one for you. If you are one of those leaders, recruiters that, like me, says, hey, I'm going to check in on people after they've started the job, see how they're doing, just let them know I'm still thinking about them, want to make sure they're successful. That's a great practice. Highly recommend that. If you plan to set that touch base at more than a week into their job, I would caution you not to do that. 2/3 of candidates told us they know if they're going to stay in a job within the first day or the first week. So within that first 5 days, 2 out of every 3 people that you hire know if they're going to stick around or not. So continue recruiting them, continue engaging them, make sure your hiring managers are alongside you, because if you just assume or hope or whatever else, right, I'm hoping we're past those things now, because many of us have seen ghosting and people start a job or they accept and don't show up. All those things are happening. Just my encouragement to you, 2/3 of candidates know in that first week. So make sure your hiring managers are engaged and connected with them and building that relationship even before day one, if at all possible. One of the things we did this year that's unique, that we've never done before, is we actually did a couple experiments. So I'll share 2 of those with you really quickly. So we asked candidates, we showed them different basic job ads, said, which one of these would you prefer to apply for? And if you take a look at these, you can probably guess which one of these were preferred 5 times more often for the candidates. And it's the one on the right here that has a pay rate attached to it. A little bit of just a look at pay transparency and how that factors in. Okay, so we're exploring this, we're looking at it. One of the things I'll share with you from a practical perspective of this is it's not enough just to say, okay, we've got pay ranges on a job posting. Whew, we're good, let's move on. No, candidates tell us in the research that they are more likely to talk to a hiring manager than to a recruiter, one of us. They're more likely to talk to a hiring manager about pay than to a recruiter. And because of that, we have to make sure they are equipped and enabled to have conversations about that. They should be able to do that with their existing staff. Some of them can't. They should be able to do that with candidates. Some of them can't. So they need to be able to understand how we set pay ranges, what those look like, how someone moves up within that pay range. They need to be able to have those conversations, because if they get the question, which they inevitably will from a candidate, and they fumble it, they flub it, they just hand it off, that is a sign that they don't care enough to really understand and support that candidate. And that's not a good place to be. So there's my encouragement to all of you. If you are thinking about the transparency piece and the pay piece, go to senior hiring managers and see how comfortable they are. Say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you very comfortable or completely uncomfortable, somewhere in the middle? What can I do to help move you towards that more comfortable side of things? What resources, what education? Do you need a one sheet? Like, what do you need from me as a recruiting leader to make sure you are equipped to do that as a hiring manager? Because they're a key part of this. And even if you're doing everything else right, they can sync that experience for a candidate. All right. One of the other things we asked was around AI, automation. So we asked candidates, if a company's using AI to screen you, which of these statements would make you most comfortable? Which job would you want to apply for? And so I've rated these for you here, the ones that are most preferred to the ones that are least preferred. And the way I look at this is they actually prefer what I call protective language. If you look in here, you see this is about protecting some of the things about who that person is, who they are at their core. They prefer protective language over more explanatory language. So tell them we're excluding all these other things. We're not looking at these because those don't matter to us in the job search or in the job application process. We care about these other pieces of who you are. So quick share on that one. All right. One last one. I'm going to pass the baton to George for a bit. On the pay transparency piece, one of the concerning things we found in the data is that a diverse candidate was more likely than a white man, essentially, to say they are using their current pay rate or previous pay rate as their yardstick for what a competitive pay rate would be. The problem is, if they're currently making less than a market rate, if they're currently being underpaid, then guess what? They're going to perpetuate that sort of thing on into the future. So we've got to make sure that we're having these conversations, we're being open and communicating with them, we're sharing the information out there, because when we're doing that, we're helping to create a more level playing field for all of them, every single candidate, and not just making sure giving one group or another a benefit that someone else doesn't get. All right, George, anything you want to add before I flip over to some of your stuff?
No, I mean, that was a lot of data. I think
know.
I screenshotted everything there. I do love going through the chat as I'm looking at it on LinkedIn and just kind of seeing what's really sticking out to certain people. I think when you mentioned the whole talent, there's layoffs and things of that nature, but how a lot of companies that are part of this global research is saying, no, we're looking to hire more people. And so there's that driven by fear of what we see versus what's reality. And so it's good to see some of these true findings that we're seeing for ourselves. It says, listen, I know what media is trying to push. I know there's social media and all these things that we're seeing on TV. And sure, we see a lot of large companies making these changes, but when you're looking overall, we're seeing that people are saying, no, we're scaling. This is a season for us. And we've seen that in the pandemic. If you think about where we were in 2020, and back then I was still in the retail space and in in our wireless industry, we were afraid. But what we realized is that people need technology now. Our resale, our sale value was high. Our year-over-year growth doubled in some terms. And so a lot of these things when it comes to the workplace, and we're sure we see layoffs in certain areas, but the overall trend is showing us, Ben, that the hiring is not stopping. There is growth and development. And so, depending on what industry you're in, whatever it may look like, I think that's part of the business strategy. How are we growing through this and not just being sucked into this vacuum of fear to saying, hey, layoffs are happening, right? Because when we think like that, we start to act like that, right? We go in the direction of our thoughts in so many ways. And so I want to challenge people and encourage people, listen, as much as we are seeing these things, let's live what we truly want to happen. Let's make these things happen and see the change, be the change.
Goodness. I love that. I'll throw one more stat in there before I pass the baton over to you. I'll flip over to your slide. One of the things we saw in the data is we actually asked employers, for those of you out there listening in who are hiring, we said, hey, are you finding more quality and available talent because of some of these other layoffs, right? What maybe a loss for one company could be a gain for you. And we saw a significant number of companies saying, absolutely, yes. If they may be laying off, but we're watching closely. We're we needed one of those people. Let's go and reach out to that person. We saw them post on LinkedIn. We saw that company's laying off. Let's go look and see who they might be losing, because that's a chance for us to scoop someone up. Yes, it helps the individual, but also it helps you be the star, bringing in one of those key candidates that might otherwise be hard to pick up. So Excellent. All right, good stuff. George, I'm going to flip over to yours. And let you share just a little bit on some of the things we're finding when it comes to hiring, inclusive hiring, those sorts of priorities.
Yeah, I think, Ben, if for everybody that's watching, and I won't go through each line of these graphs, but I think one of the key things to really pinpoint on what we're seeing in some of the D&I aspects of hiring for diversity is that, I wanted to look at, and we specifically want to kind of look at year over year. And in this case, you're looking on the screen, you're seeing 2021 versus 2023. And just as you're looking at that, the dark blue is 2023. And it's just the overall growth, right? We're seeing substantial growth on what people are really looking to have when it comes to specific methods and tools that they're using to really increase their hiring process and the diversity standpoint. What we found, Ben, especially in a lot of companies that, over the last 3 years, diversity, equity, inclusion, this D&I has become part of the forefront. Right, it's been part of the conversation. We've seen it go from the top 10 to top 5 to top number 1 when it comes to the hiring practices and things of that nature. But it's been steadily in that 1 to 2 spot, right? That a lot of companies are now, the employers and the employees are saying this is a focus. This is important to us. I think as we go back, Ben, and we look at the conversations that have been had over the last couple of sessions with our guests, the overall finding is listen, the transparency is the key. Right. I want to not only just be a part of a company that's going to pay me, because we can talk about that. And I'm sure you got a data that you can pull up when it comes to pay versus growth and how that is important, right, to these people. But companies now understand, how do we continue this conversation? Something that has really grabbed my attention over the last 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, but I've really been focused over the last 6 months with you, Ben, is understanding why some companies are thriving in this process and some companies are struggling, in particular to the DEI. And what we found is that, in those conversations with some of these companies is that they use certain words, right? They're trigger words that really happen. And what we found is that companies that are really thriving and we're seeing growth and development, they have what's called strategies, right? Other companies that are not thriving or that are failing, that have, kind of been inconsistent in their practices, whether it's pay, whether it's, hiring, whatever it may be, they created programs. And there's a huge difference with these, and just kind of explain it from my perspective. So in my shoes, so to speak, of George's DEI strategy versus George's DEI programs thought. When I think of a strategy for most organizations, companies that are thriving, that are growing, that are elevating the scaling, companies that are not laying off right now, right? That are saying, hey, we're going to grow. These companies have great strategies. They have a business strategy. When you think of a strategy, think of it in this. The difference between a strategy and a business program is that a strategy is a long-term plan that truly outlines an organization's goals, objectives, their tactics, right, that they're going to use for achieving sustainable success. You'll see companies do this in the last quarter of the year. They'll go through their different strategies, marketing strategies, business strategies. And companies that are really taking the forefront on the DEI aspect have DEI strategy that then aligns with their company's business strategy that also speaks to their company's values and missions. It's not separate. It's not a separate program, but it's part of who they are and what they do. On the other hand, the business program is a collection of related projects, activities that are designed to really accomplish a specific business objective. And so when you say, when hiring for diversity is a struggle within an organization, then I look at it and say, does your company have a program or does it have a strategy, right? Are you just looking for activities that are going to make people feel good for a moment, right? How do Black History Month just passed, so we're going to do something that highlights Black history. But what do we do to continue that conversation to make sure that our diverse candidates are part of that? When we talk about diverse, I'm not necessarily speaking just on race, right? We're talking gender, we're talking special needs and things in nature. Are we prepared for all aspects of diversity, equity, and inclusion? And so those are some key things that I believe in that are huge when it comes to those key findings. And we can talk about, the hiring assessment aspect of D&I, right? Go on and on. I'll let you maybe jump in and throw another stat or data that may have triggered in that conversation here.
One of the big things that you brought up the transparency piece, and one of the other things we saw that really stood out to me, because the way you're talking about this, the way you're sharing this aligns with this completely. One of the things we asked candidates about was respect. How can an employer respect who you are? Because the way you respect me might be slightly different than the way someone needs to respect George, or needs to respect Carla in the chat, or Rose in the chat, or some of the other people in the chat, right? The way that each of us gets respect is a little different. And so we see candidates saying that in different ways. And there are different priorities, different levels of ways we can show that. And so that's the piece I was coming back to, George. You're sharing that. Like this comes down to, you can say you respect me, but do you show me you respect me? Because those are two different things. And one of them, I actually know you care. The other one, I know you're just talking through that program until the end date comes and you move on to whatever's next.
Yeah. I mean, the respect factor is me understanding who you are and what your values are, right?
Yes.
What do you care about? What are your values? And so I show you respect, right? And I show up because I know Ben. I know what Ben is about. I know who Ben is as a man, as a husband, as a father, man of faith, things of that nature. As a leader, I get to know those things because I'm connected with you. I think, as you talked about respect, and I think about, that sense of belonging, right? How that plays into the D&I and B aspect, belonging aspect of the D&I is that, the psychological definition, we've been talking about this a lot over the last couple of months. The psychological definition of belonging is I feel accepted, respected, and appreciated by my leader. And what that does as well. And so, having that respect, that transparency to say, listen, I know what you are about as an individual, as a man or a woman, and being able to be transparent on that level. Respect, as you said, Ben, is not just some word that is a standard here. Respect becomes individual, right? Because my standards and expectations for me may be different than yours. Although we may align in different ways and we may be connected in many ways as a team and be able to relate in a lot of ways, there are certain different things that become a part of that as well.
Goodness. Okay. All right. So I want to chat with this deeper with you on this one, George, but we got a couple things to get to before we finish up. So a couple more, just one more stat for you. I think we're going to do some takeaways, and then we'll do some prize giveaways for all of you listening in. George, thank you for sharing. And I'm excited. When I saw this data, I was like, okay, let's double check this, because to see all of those this year, employers really saying we're going all in on this, and there's some practical ways, not just, okay, we think it's important, but we're not doing it yet. That was exciting for me to see in this data as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So speaking of respect, one last thing I'll share with you, because I saw someone in the chat earlier talking about how they give feedback to candidates. And I apologize, I didn't catch the name in that. I thought that was a great recommendation. And they said they give feedback to candidates on what's working, what they can work on, how they can improve next time, those kinds of things. That's very, very rare to do that. It's hard to do that, but it's very valuable to the person on the other end of that. That shows them a lot of respect. And so I'll share this stat with you. When we look at the actual data, the number of candidates, because we ask candidates why they ghost employers, we ask some really clear questions there, and they're very open and honest with us. 45% more candidates said they ghost employers because of a lack of contact, a lack of recruiter follow-up, a lack of engagement this year compared to last year. So more and more candidates are saying, hey, if you're not going to continue to communicate with me, I'm out of this. And it's on us, essentially. We're creating some of that problem. So if you're one of those leaders who says, I'd love to do more of that, but I can't quite get to it, we've got to find ways to make that a priority, whether you bring on a coordinator who can just send out thank yous, right, part-time, or we have some sort of tool that helps automate some of that. Whatever it is, we've got to be more open, more willing to communicate there. All right. So here's our big takeaways before I start to wrap up and start to do some prizes and things like that. So number one, I want you to walk away with some of these big things. Number one, it's still a candidate's market in many cases. They have a lot of power. They're still scarce. It's still hard to find them. But at the same time, that doesn't mean it, good luck, suckers, you're out of luck. No, it means as employers, we can use transparency. We can use respect, as you heard George talking about, really understanding someone. We can use those things as a way to stand out from the other employers that are out there. That makes you more competitive. It makes you more valuable. It makes your hiring process much more useful to the candidates, whether they get the job or not, by the way. Even if they don't get the job, some of our data show that candidates still don't mind, or they still appreciate the hiring process if they feel like they're learning something about themselves, if they still feel like they're treated well. Even if they don't get the job, they still appreciate that more so than just the black hole, essentially, for the resumes. And so we heard George share a minute ago, inclusive hiring is more practical, more relevant than ever before. A lot of employers saying we want to do this, not sure how. George just shared with you a couple of different stats, different ways to do that. And it's a big focus, big priority. George, one of the ones I was going to throw at you a minute ago, I forgot it till just now. Get your take on this really quickly for our last takeaway. One of the things that I saw in the research that surprised me is we asked candidates, if you join a company or if you're applying for a company that doesn't have a career path for you, they don't plan to grow you, do you expect to get paid more? And what we saw in the data is that a candidate who is racially diverse is much more likely to say, about 50% more likely to say, I expect to be paid a lot more money if I join a company that doesn't have a career path there for me. I'd love to get your take on that really quick. What do you think that is? Is there a thought or anything to wrap into that?
Yeah, I think just to keep it quick, Ben, is that we don't want to waste time, right? If there's not going to be a growth, right, then pay me my value, my work. Because sometimes what people would typically do is say, hey, listen, I'm willing to take X amount less because I see a bigger picture. I know that I'm going to be developed. I know that I'm going to go somewhere. But if you don't want to grow me, then you have to show me, right?
Oh.
That's plain and simple. If you don't want to grow me, you got to show me, right? I think of Jerry Maguire, show me the money. If you're not going to grow me, you got to show me.
Oh, okay. Someone write that one down because it's another Georgism. We've got to keep track of that one. That's a really good one. Thank you, George. If you don't want to grow me, you got to show me. Show me the money. Okay. And last but not least, just a reminder for all of you, you're doing hard work. And I've loved seeing the comments because it's our chance to get all of us back together as a community that focuses on hiring and bringing in the best people and everything else. And you're doing really important work. And sometimes it's easy to get stuck on the treadmill of just fill another rec. Just got to put another person in a job, more interviews, schedule all those things. And you don't ever pull back and say, I'm having a bigger impact on people, helping them have a meaningful career, meaningful life. I was so excited to see some of those comments earlier on that. you're helping to impact the business in a positive way. As I mentioned, a lot of companies struggling with talent scarcity and availability, and they have no other hope except for the work that you're doing. So thank you to all of you for making those positive impacts and on the community, on the candidates, but also on the company as well. Okay, so if you've enjoyed the conversation today, you enjoyed some of the research we've shared, as I said, this is a snippet, a glimpse of some of the bigger stuff that's out there. A couple things. I'll post in the chat in a minute the link to our first graphic sharing some of the data points that we didn't even get to today in the chat. We have a couple more infographics coming. We have a full report, bunch of data coming out of there. It's written like we've talked today, so very practical, lots of examples, not just a bunch of charts, thank goodness. If you are one of those leaders right now that's listening in that says, hey, I'd love to see more about this. I'd love to understand more about the data for my space or for something else like this priority for us. We have a couple of different spots every month where we talk with different leaders. It keeps us up to date, keeps our finger on the pulse, but it also lets us share the data out. So if you want to have one of those conversations, ping us, let us know, and you can get all of the research there. Okay, George, I think I've done enough teasing and mentioning awards and mentioning prizes and everything else. You think we're ready to share some of those winners now? Drum roll. I hear it over there. Okay, perfect. Okay, so here are our winners. So first off, thank you to Goody. If you're on the right column over here and your name's there, they were grabbing winners separately from me. So you may be on both lists. Take a screenshot here if you're on here so you know who to follow up with. But if you won one of the Goody prizes, reach out to Rosario there. Email address is there, and you can get in touch with them, find out how to get your award. If you are on the talent scarcity book, I'll get you a signed copy out to you. Just shoot an email to events@lhra.io, and we will make sure and get you a way to collect your address, everything else. We have a process for that so that we can make sure everything gets sent out appropriately. And just a thank you for those of you who chimed in, who listened in, who supported the event today, sharing your thoughts, sharing your ideas and stuff. I enjoy it so much. I appreciate it so much. I know George does as well. And as always, we could not have put this event together without some amazing sponsors of the research, but also of the event today overall. So thanks to Jim, Advanced RPO, Modern Hire, and obviously Goody for the work, for making this available, for making it possible for us to do this. It's been so much fun, and I've enjoyed it a lot. As I said at the beginning, we'll have SHRM and HRCI credits for the session, 2 credit hours. So we'll be reaching out to all of you after the event is over with an email to give you those details on how to get those credits. George, any last comments before we wrap up this session?
I would just say something that's just really, it's been, I guess, a quote of everything that I've been signing off with, because transparency, right? We as leaders, some of us don't have leadership within our title, but we are leaders. We're influencing people. We're giving grace, love, and trust to those who are underneath our support and our team. And I'll always just challenge you to remember this. True leadership does not want anything from you, but it should want everything for you. That's it.
I just want to sit quietly and think on that one a little bit. Say it one more time for us, George, please.
True leadership doesn't want anything from you. True leadership wants everything for you.
Excellent. Here's my encouragement to all of you out there. Thank you, by the way, George, for that. I love that. Here's my encouragement to all of you out there. Find someone around you today, whether you're working physically with them or you're working virtually with them, doesn't matter, but find someone that you can do something for, someone you can support, someone you can bring some encouragement to today, make the world a little bit better place. Thank you to all of you for joining us for this wonderful session. I've enjoyed it so much. I always have a blast with George, but really digging into TA, into hiring, into recruiting, because it was the favorite part of my work as an HR leader, was really getting to recruit and find the best talent out there and help them to have more meaningful career and work. So thank you to all of you so much for joining us today. We hope you got some good notes, good ideas, takeaways. We will catch you again next time. We'll be coming up really quickly. I'll be at Unleash. George will be at Unleash in a few weeks. So if you're going to be there, ping us on LinkedIn. Let us know. We'd love to say hello to you in person, as well as we'll be seeing many of you for HR Summer School in June. So if you're not familiar with that event, it's our big flagship event like this, but bigger, more people, more engagement, more prizes, all kinds of good stuff. hrsummerschool.org is where you can find out about that. Thank you to all of you so much for the support. We hope you have a great rest of your day.